Hey everybody, and welcome back to the CineFix Top 100, our sleepy little rural village where we have to fend off the bandits who would keep us from watching 100 of the greatest movies of all time. I'm Clint Gage, and joining me as always, CineFix's resident expert on Japanese history from the years 1586-1587, Alex Stedman. How you doing, Alex?
Hello. I'm well. How are you?
You knew that very specific college degree was going to come in handy one.
You know, it had to be used for something.
Yep.
Eventually.
And also, of course, our favorite fake samurai with a comically large sword, Michael Calabro. Cal, what's up, dude?
How's it going, man?
It's going. It's
Good.
going.
You like my Buster sword?
I do.
I think that's the invention of the Buster sword, right?
Is it like the sword version of a blunderbuss?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just huge.
Just bigger than you need, honestly. Listen, guys, I'm excited to be back here at the table.
Yeah,
All
we
three
did
of
it.
us.
We did it. We're back.
New season?
And we're calling it season 2. We were only gone we had a couple quiet weeks there, but we're back for season 2, which I am very excited to dig into. But before we get into the movie that we're here to talk about today, I got a few bits of business to go over from producer Dan. Number 1, it's season 2, but we already talked about that, so I'm skipping it.
Okay.
Forget it.
Number 2. With
Number 2 for season 2?
Number 2 for season 2. We are now, each season will be grouped kind of by theme. So every season will have a sort of thematic through line, which in theory ought to make this show infinitely more interesting.
Yeah.
I'd like to believe.
It's a
Anyway.
good spin.
Yeah.
It's organized,
I
you
think
know?
so.
You know, Dan finally doing something.
But not, well, it's either Dan or the algorithm. I don't know. The more terrifying option is the algorithm sprouted some sort of AI that's now grouping these movies together by theme, which I frankly find terrifying.
We did cover Terminator, so
We already covered
it's on
Terminator.
theme.
Yeah. So it gave us our
learning.
chance to
Yeah.
kind of, So anyway, the theme for season 2 that we're getting going with is community. So,
How generic.
With our little community.
baby steps. But no, it's community. So the way that films deal with preserving communities, the way communities can be divided, I would assume we're going to get a block of movies here in season 2 that are going to deal with them in hopefully different ways. We'll see how good this AI is now that Dan's algorithm is getting smarter. But on top of that, the other wrinkle that we have here for season 2, we also obviously have the familiar envelope here. That we will reveal the placement of today's movie at the end of which, but we also have another envelope in play here in season 2.
The f*** is that?
Yeah, what is that?
In the spirit of community for season 2, if after our discussion of the movie, we all three as a community decide we want to give that movie the boot off of our list,
What? Wait, I legitimately was not prepared for this.
we
This is
can
crazy.
strike it. So if we talk about a movie for an hour and a half and decide it doesn't belong on our top 100, we can strike it and replace it with one of the 3 movies that we have in this envelope. We can't look at the movies first.
Okay.
We can decide, if we talk about a movie and decide, like, you know what, this doesn't feel
So
like
how
top
many
100.
Dan picks are in this season?
I was going to say, was this implemented after Groundhog Day?
If it might have been, like, honestly, like Groundhog Day is the example, right?
Yeah.
None of us really liked Groundhog Day, and it was Dan that put it on there. So if the 3 of us decide we didn't want Groundhog Day, we could have used it.
This
So
is
it's
too much
no-
power.
No big surprise. Well, I mean, the good news is we now have a little bit of leverage to fight back against Dan's algorithm.
Thank God.
Which I think is, frankly, it's good. But that'll be an interesting thing. We have 3 options to do it across season 2. So we'll talk about the movie, and if we decide we want to give it the boot, we certainly can. But we only have 3 opportunities to do it.
Okay, so we have to be conservative, but we can't. It's a tool we can use.
Yeah, it's
Oh.
but
Well, we're all conservatives here.
We don't do that.
great power, great responsibility, et cetera, and so forth. So that'll be a fun new wrinkle here in season 2.
That is a fun new wrinkle.
Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing the show was missing, was being gamified to a certain degree.
You know?
So
Everyone's
yeah,
asking for.
Exactly.
So at any moment, an episode can turn into a not 100 on a dime.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, not at any moment. Towards the end when we open the envelopes.
Well, a specific moment.
Yeah. There will be one moment where it can turn into a not top 100. So, heads up for that. Beware. But I think that's all the business that I'm willing to talk about anyway. Dan gave me several other notes, but honestly, forget about it. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. The show's the same. Let's get into the movie that we're talking about today, which is, I don't know, have you guys ever seen this movie before? It's called Seven Samurai.
Never heard of
I
it.
haven't seen it.
Nope.
Yeah, not many people have. This is a real,
It's a real
obscure.
This is Dan trying to sound pretentious.
diamond in the rough.
Yeah, this is the book you buy just to put on a bookshelf. Yeah, exactly. So Akira Kurosawa, 1954, one of the most famous movies of all time. He co-wrote the film. He edited the film as well. And the fascinating thing about this movie to me is that it's kind of every movie's grandpa, right? Like, it is just a patriarch of a movie. It's so thoroughly laid the groundwork, and it's been so, which is why like rewatching it for me is kind of a trip, because it feels so familiar. It's not because I watch it every 6 months like clockwork or something like that. It's because it's been imitated and straight up remade several times. There's so many movies that I know and love and grew up with owe so much to Seven Samurai that watching it outside of that context, you're like, yeah, I've seen this before.
I mean, you think about like the tropes, not the tropes, but yeah, like the narrative devices that this movie sets up. It's assembling the team. How many times have we seen that since Seven Samurai? There's certain action motifs that you'll see first in this movie and then later in other movies. There's the deconstruction of the hero and the myth. Like, that is all stuff that kind of was popularized by Seven Samurai. Like, and you're right, I didn't really get into Seven Samurai until later in my film viewing life, and it felt so familiar. Like I was like, I've seen Star Wars. I've seen all, like, it does feel, but it all starts really with Seven Samurai.
Yeah, this is the first time I've been rewatching this movie since like college, and I remember liking it in college. But to your point, right? Like, this time around, I'm just like, man, it's like one of those movies that makes you realize there hasn't been as much innovation in cinema as I thought over like
No, we're all just doing Seven Samurai over and over.
The last 70 years. Like, we're gonna get into it later. We're gonna talk about like how this is transitioned into westerns and action movies, but this is the the primordial ooze of like action cinema as we know it today. It's like an utterly foundational text, so eminently watchable and just easy to understand. It crosses language barriers, it crosses cultural barriers. It's an incredible piece of work, and I can't believe how much, to your point, that this has touched. I don't think you can name a movie that hasn't drawn something from it.
You could put every movie made since 1954 on a dartboard, throw a dart, and there's like a 7 out of 10 chance you're going to land on a movie that has something that it's borrowing from Seven Samurai.
Yeah.
Like, it's, I mean, everything from the side plots of like the two kids falling in love off to the side of this big grander adventure. There's the underdog stuff. There's the getting the team together stuff.
Even how he constructs a battle.
There's down to the nuts and bolts of like how you choreograph action.
Well, and edit it too.
I mean, like, you can draw a straight line from this movie to The Two Towers, to Lord of the Rings.
Oh, there's a lot of Lord of the Rings in here.
No, there's a lot of Seven Samurai.
Yes, yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
Which is the tricky thing as a modern audience to look at this movie and sort of you have to look at it in the context of like, no, this is a thing that did it early. And to be personal, I don't want to say first. I assume they did it. It was close to first, but there's a lot of movies before 1954. But like Seven Samurai, the impact that it made was so thorough and so big, and we're still seeing it.
And it's also one of those, like, kind of on the same point, it's one of those movies that I can't believe was made, not just because of how over budget it went and over time, over schedule, but like, there was nothing really to point to as much to say, like, this is why we should make this movie, because this was a success. Like, Seven Samurai became that for everyone else, but Seven Samurai didn't really have that as much.
Well, and so let's just get into the pedigree of this movie, because I think that ultimately, when it was first released, the movie's kind of right smack in the middle of Kurosawa's filmography, right? Like, he'd made a lot of stuff prior to Ikiru and Rashomon were kind of right ahead of this. He'd been working for a while, but then, Throne of Blood and High and Low and Yojimbo and movies like that were still to come. So Seven Samurai is kind of like right smack in the middle of his body of work. And at the time, it won awards, and it was the third highest grossing movie in Japan that year, which I was like, really?
What beat it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I found that fact, and I was blown away by that fact, but apparently not enough to look up what beat it.
Do you know what else came out in 1954?
I see that's
Godzilla,
Yeah.
Gojira.
So talk about a year.
It's a banner year for Toho.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, when it was released, Western critics were a little bit mixed on it, but all that to say, the real pedigree of this movie is what we've been talking about already, the legacy, like the 70 years on legacy of this movie, I think is the real pedigree of it. So to your point about it being expensive and over budget, which, we can talk more about that later, but also, Kurosawa is one of he's the Mount Rushmore filmmaker kind of guy. And you always hear, what's fascinating to me is when you hear stories about guys like Kurosawa who go through a stretch of their career where they can't get anything made. And he very much did that. By the 60s and the 70s were tough for Kurosawa. And there was even a suicide attempt mixed in there because he was having health problems and he couldn't get any movies made. And there's documentaries made about David Lean and Orson Welles going through eras like this where it's like, these giant names just can't get anything made. And it's baffling in retrospect, thinking about like who wouldn't make.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's just, because there's all these factors. The film industry in Japan was kind of tanking in the 60s and 70s. And so it was, and then, Tora, he walked away from that. And so American money dried up for him. And there's all kinds of things. But the idea of Seven Samurai being way over budget, way over schedule, did make it a little harder for him down the road. But like, he's so thoroughly committed to his vision of it. There's several things that I've read about him and about this movie, making this movie, that it really speaks to how much of a like committed artist the guy was. And like the fact that we're still talking about this movie in the way that we are 70 years later, it's not just like, oh yeah, what movie was cool in the 50s? Seven Samurai. It's like, oh, what movie impacted every movie that came after?
Yeah, literally every movie.
Like it's the guy's incredible.
You know what the crazy thing about this movie is that Kurosawa directed it, he wrote it, and edited it. And to have such a foundational work of cinema come from such a singular vision is like genuinely impressive, right? Like, I'll sit here and blovate about how much I love Scorsese, and at some point I really want to talk about how much Killers of the Flower Moon takes from this and how similar they are. But that is not for this conversation because
both exactly 3 hours and 42 minutes or something.
26 minutes.
26.
That's so funny.
So not only that,
I was joking, by the way. I don't think that they are.
They are actually the same.
The same length?
Within a minute.
Okay.
Right? And, like Scorsese, where would his movies be without his editing? And it's like a lot of that is Thelma Schumacher, and so many of these great filmmakers have key collaborators in these roles that they work with all the time. And just for Kurosawa to make, I would make the argument, the foundational action movie and take up all like the key roles of all the key technical roles is incredible. I mean, it's just like he just didn't star in it and he wasn't the DP.
Right.
Yeah. But even like the performances, I mean, he knows how to get that out of Mifune. Like everything that fires on all cylinders in this movie, it all comes back to Kurosawa. It's incredible.
Yeah. As collaborative a medium as filmmaking is, like necessarily, like for this movie to come out of basically one dude just pushing it forward is insane.
Sometimes I hate myself for that stuff, right? Because the part of the charm of the medium that is it's collaborative, but you can't help sometimes to just be like, oh, Stanley Kubrick, he's so good, right? And it's just like, but he just treats these actors like shit, and all they are functionally meat puppets.
Right.
And it is a little funny too that we're talking about this as we start like the community section, and I feel like this movie is the perfect movie for that. But at the end of the day, it really is Kurosawa. It's this one dude.
So, speaking of that, there's a he wrote an autobiography at some point towards the end of his life, and it was it's a fascinating read. First of all, he ends it after 1950. Like, he doesn't talk much about anything post 1950 because it seems like the foreword of the book says something about like, it seems like he's taking the if you can't say something nice approach. Like, he just kind of shut down talking about stuff after 1950. So it kind of covers in detail up to Rashomon, right? So he doesn't talk a lot about Seven Samurai in it, but he does. The last 20 or so pages of the book are an excerpt from an interview that he'd given to, I don't know, some Toho special feature, something from years before. That was just like this bullet pointed checklist of like movie thoughts. Like, it's just my thoughts on filmmaking, and it's not structured in any sort of way. Like, it's literally just a bullet point list of 3 or 4 sentence bits of wisdom at a time. One of which was talking about editing and the way that he enjoyed editing his own films. And it was mostly to do with how he didn't show his crew dailies. He never showed his crew dailies until he'd had a chance to edit them. And he did that throughout Seven Samurai, is that he would edit at night after they shot, and then he wouldn't show his crew anything that until it had been at least sort of partially edited. And it served two functions. One, when he was done with production, all he had to worry about was the fine cut, like the assembly was already done. But two, one of the things that he talked about was a lot of times people, they don't know what they're shooting, and they don't know why I'm making them do it for 3 straight days just to get it right, until I show them the sequence. Until you can show them the scene and be like, this is the grand idea. So he was very much a guy that believed in making sure his crew knew like the big picture, the scope of what it was they were doing, and not just so focused on the myopic kind of, I got to get this shot right. No, we're doing 300 takes of this one shot just to get it right. Like, I don't understand. And then you show them the scene and you're like, oh, got it. And it re-energizes everybody. He also had a whole point in this section about like thinking of himself as, he made a point. He's like, I don't want to go so far as to compare this directly to war, but like,
but here I go.
The script is the war banner, like that everybody follows, and the filmmaker, the director, is very much the general on the front lines of it, and it's making sure every piece of your crew is bought into the entire goal. And the edit in his approach to editing very much did that. I mean, building the community of a filmmaking team, like everybody following him, they have to be on. He has to get everybody to buy into his vision of this movie. And one of the ways that he did that was sharing sequences instead of individual shots, which I think is fascinating. It's like, that shot that we slaved over for 10 days? Like, here's how it works in this scene, and look at how good this is. And it's like, oh yeah, great. And then all of a sudden the crew's back on board and they're into it and they trust you. Mm-hmm. So like he's very much a guy that, I hate to give Dan's algorithmic AI credit, but this is a great movie to start for sure the community run with, because like, here's a filmmaker that believed in the community, both, in front of and behind the camera.
Speaking of taking like a small farming village to get a shot, like we're going to talk a lot about the cinematography in this film, I'm sure. But to your point, if he needed to get a shot in the can and he needed it in a very specific way, what is so beautiful about this film is how far back the camera is, and he chooses to shoot things in meandering shots that pan and linger, as opposed to getting extra coverage of close-ups and cutting away and cutting in. He doesn't do that as much. So if he needs to get a thing in a very particular way, odds are there's 30 people in front of the camera, and it's a two-minute take that requires intricate camera moves. So when people need to reset it again, it's just like everybody has to go back to square one. They're going to have to rush in. The camera's going to have to pan. And, how many hours a day could they even have to shoot that? Because they're shooting it in like with lenses that the aperture is so down so you could get that depth of field. It's incredible.
Yeah.
To your point, Clint, like I can imagine working on the movie and being like, why am I doing this? And to what you were saying, like I always when I watch this movie, I think of Kanbei as kind of like a stand-in almost for Kurosawa. Mm-hmm. Like, because Kanbei is such a process-oriented character, and Kurosawa is so married to his process as well. But Kanbei, one of the reasons I find him such a good leader, and we'll talk about it more as I'm sure we break down the movie, is he's very decisive and confident, but he knows when to listen to his team.
We've touched on a lot of general sort of brilliance about this. I want to talk quickly before we get too far away from your comment about the lenses.
Yeah.
Because like if we can get into some nuts and bolts brilliance first, like not a lot of people use telephoto lenses in the 50s. Telephoto lenses being the very long lenses, typically a shallower depth of field, so less of the frame is in focus unless you have a massive amount of light, which there are several scenes that are photographed so impressively, and it's not like 1954's ancient history or anything. It's like, how did they figure out how to create fire or whatever? Like, but film technology has obviously come a long ways in the last 80 years or whatever. Yeah. So like in the 50s, for them to be using telephoto lenses and for them to be, there's one shot in particular that I
Are we thinking of the same shot here?
We might be. I don't know. I'll go first. I don't know what order in the movie. We'll bounce around a bunch, but it's the scene where Kikuchiyo first joins them in the little barn, where it's before they get back to the village, and he shows up drunk. He fails the test where he gets hit over the head with the log and walking in, and he's mad. And he's running around, and there's so much of this movie, character-wise, is people running and screaming and wailing, and everybody is so loud and so panicky and so desperate that's sort of the baseline for the movie. And so the heightened moments are the moments where everything gets quiet. To me, like, which I think is a kind of a fascinating version, because the first 20 minutes of this movie, it's villagers crying, "Oh my God, they're coming! What are we gonna do?" And you shut up, and you shut up, and like that's the whole movie, until Kanbei shows up and it just gets quiet.
Yeah,
which is incredible. But there's a moment where Kikuchiyo is chasing around the dude that hit him with the log, and he's drunk and stumbling and yelling, and then all of a sudden he stops in point and he falls down. And he's in the foreground, and the camera falls with him, and everybody else, all the other samurai that have already been recruited, are in focus in the background watching it happen. And he falls down past a little fence, so there's production design in between them, and it's all chaos and all running, and like the fact that, number one, you can follow the action around that small space in just these weird, it's blocked and choreographed very intricately, and then to land it with it wasn't a full-on telephoto lens, but it was a long lens, because it's kind of a cramped frame. But to land it to where everybody's in focus, and narratively you're looking at a shot that's important, because everybody's sitting there watching Kikuchiyo go through this, struggle, whatever, drunken stupor, before they decide to let him in. It's just a fascinating shot, and it's dark in that room. It's at night. It's firelit. It's a brilliantly done shot, and it's all of this chaos, running around this thing, yelling at each other, "Get back here! I'm going to kick your ass!" kind of energy that then settles into this very quiet, pensive shot. And to me, that's what this movie does better than just about anything else.
Well, it's all in service of tone and story, too, because I think that scene is a really good kind of microcosm of what this entire movie is doing, where there are really serious moments, and then there's moments of comedy, and then there's moments of silence. And that all goes back to his approach to cinematography and the sound design. But it's like, again, like, even just looking at, like, the sixth samurai in focus without Kikichiro, it's like, you can tell he's kind of an outsider. That's all in service of the character.
Which shot were you going to talk about?
Fishing.
Oh, right. Where they're all up on the cliff?
Yeah. Talk about just like all the elements firing together, right? Because yes, it's all about the long lenses, right? And keeping everything in focus and shooting it at the day. But there's an element of scouting, because it's not like they can build that set to do that. They just found a cliff and a waterfall, and the way that they photograph it, so it starts on them, and all of it just looks like a painting that you would see in an art museum, where it's just a samurai sitting on top of the cliff on the waterfall. And then it cuts out, and it's still deep focus with the guy in the foreground getting ready to fish. They're in the background, fully in focus. The camera pans with them, and it's just this beautiful shot as they're looking down on.
And then it follows the guy. It comes down, follows the guy to go catch the fish,
and
then comes back and
then back up. It's unbelievable.
And to think of like how long that lens was, to even stage that, to put the camera in the right place where you even have room
to move around. Yeah.
There's no zoom on this lens either. It's not like they can reframe as they go. Like, it's just one fixed telephoto lens looking up and then down and then over and then back.
And to your point, right? Like, Kurosawa is not only a master of the lenses and the framing, but blocking. So even within this shot, it's blocked in a way where you get the close-up, you get the medium shot, you get the long, and everything is in focus at all times, and it just looks beautiful. And
which, by the way, I think at this point in the history of film, if you're going to talk about a director that stages single shots that have close-ups and wides and different setups all within one fixed length shot, it's Spielberg.
Yep.
And Kurosawa was doing it in 1954, by the way. And so, like, it's another thing that, like, a defining trait of an entire filmmaker's career, almost. Like, I would argue that's one of the coolest things in, like, nuts and bolts filmography of Steven Spielberg. Like, that's one of the things that he excels at. But here you see it in Seven Samurai, doing some really heavy lifting, like, filmmaking-wise, narratively, all of it.
It's doing all of it at once, all at the same time. And it's just truly impressive.
Yeah.
Can I talk about another scene that really does all of that, and it's very early in the morning movie. So it's when we see Kanbei cut his top knot off and save the baby. First of all, one of my favorite like subtle shots in the entire movie is the woman running with the rice balls, and she like comes out of the building, and and there's like so much light around her, and she seems so far away, but she's running and panicking, like you're saying, everything is so frantic.
Well, she has that brief moment of where she wants to go check on her kid, but then doesn't, and then comes back.
Yeah. And then you have, obviously he cuts off the top knot, and then he goes to kind of trick the thief out of the building. And then the thief comes out of the building, and it's this very innovative kind of mix of slow motion and regular motion that I don't think was ever done before that. Like there was slow motion in action movies before Seven Samurai, but the mix, because he's killed and he falls, and then the mother goes to her baby, and it happens so quickly, but it's so impactful because it slows down for a second.
Yeah, there's that guy dies and falls into the dirt in slow motion, and that's the only cut in that sequence that is in slow motion. Like, it's not a sequence of slow motion, it's a sequence of real-time stuff, and the sound never slows down.
Yeah.
The sound design is still in real time. You don't hear a stab, you don't hear a slice, you don't hear any of the actual or anything like that. It's just this guy slow-mo going into the dirt as a result of what Kanbei did. There's another death that happens in slow motion, and it's when Kyoso, when they meet him, and he's trying to walk away from the guy that, like, they fight with bamboo first, and then there's like, if it would have been steel, I would have killed you or whatever. And when he kills that guy, he does the same thing where he slows down and falls in like he falls into the dirt, puff of dirt, dead in slow motion, while everything else kind of sticks around. But it happens again, not with somebody dying, but it happens again when Kanbei introduces himself to the village, where it's all yelling, all screaming, and then Kanbei walks in and it's quiet. And like that, to me, that's one of the fascinating things about this movie to me, is the choices of when to slow down. There's not as much that ramps up, like it's the slowing down that makes things seem peaceful and possible and hopeful, narratively, but also, like, from a filmmaking perspective, it makes you pay attention. The stuff that you pay attention to is the quiet stuff.
And I think you get that way more in the first half of the movie, because once you get to the second half, it's like full chaotic,
fighting, and
full war. But in the first, you're kind of building up that hope, kind of like what you're saying, that optimism. And a lot of it is around Kanbei, and like you're saying, the other is around Kyozo, these kind of very like centered, confident, self-assured men who like kind of just like have an aura of calm around them.
But to your point, right? It's mostly about when he chooses to contrast. Right? That's when you notice it. It's like when he chooses to contrast his own like status quo. Perfect example. It's how do you say his name? Kyozo.
Yeah.
Right? There's the long running narrative of like he was the farmer's child, his parents were murdered by bandits, and like this is a very personal story.
Oh, that's Kikuchiyo.
Kikuchiyo?
Yeah, that's Mifune's character.
Yes. Yeah.
Kikuchiyo.
And like, it's very much like his family was murdered by bandits. He kind of stumbled into, being a swordsman.
Yeah.
He had no other choice. And there's this scene in the battle sequence where he's holding the child and he's just like, this is me. And what's interesting about that scene is it not only beautiful shot with like the
there's a mill behind
water
him.
Mill.
Yeah,
it's like this epic,
burning behind him, but shallow depth of field on that shot, which is awesome. Because literally 2 minutes ago, we're just talking about he's so good at keeping everything in focus and frame. Yet here's the moment when this guy is kneeling in a stream, cradling a child, talking about how this was like basically the birth of his identity, and nothing else is in focus, just him in this moment. And as the audience, you just pause to realize that like it just emphasizes the power of the moment and the arc of the character and all of these narrative elements. And to your point, what you guys are talking about with the sound and everything like that, it's all about the contrast. When he chooses to contrast that stuff, and that's like the real mark of like, here's how it all works. And for this particular moment, I'm going to do the exact opposite as I have been doing, because in doing the exact opposite, it's going to dramatically emphasize this thematic moment.
And that's the key frankly, as the most basic way to put it, like that's the key to make things not boring.
Yeah.
Like movies that you forget about are flat because they do the same thing for their entire runtime.
Michael Bay does that, right? Like everything's a hero shot to Michael Bay. So when everything's a hero shot, you can't.
Nothing is a hero shot. Exactly. Yeah. And can we talk about too, just really quickly with that shot, just like how hard that was, how much skill in the craft you need to pull that shot off? Because like, here's my thing, and I might have said this to you guys before, but like I understand how MP3s work. Like I get ones and zeros, it's coding, whatever. We can create digital, literally anything we want. I don't know how the hell they made records. You know, like a wax platter with grooves on it, and you put a needle around it, and it sounds like the Rolling Stones. Like that blows my mind. I don't know how they do that. And so thinking about in the 50s, there's a building on fire in the background, a bright light source in the background. It's the shot takes place at night, so at minimum they're having to shoot day for night, and then getting that crisp, shallow depth of field in those conditions when you can't check it.
Nope.
You're doing it with a tape measure and your gut and chutzpah. Like that's how you get that shot, and like the confidence in the craft to pull shots like that off is incredible. Like now, you light it and you look at the monitor and be like, a little bit more, and or that's close enough. I'll color it later. Like, nope. Like, shooting black and white in 1954, you got it or you didn't. And like I don't know. That's the thing that you don't have to worry about anymore.
In this edit, we're shooting in 4K but delivering in 1080, so we can punch in and out on close-ups all we want. You get a close-up. You get a close-up.
Everybody gets a close-up.
Everybody gets a close-up. What? We need a wide? Great, we have that too.
Yeah, perfect.
And the other thing too about like the fire and burning things down, he wasn't they didn't build sets for this. They built villages. So like I think I read somewhere that they had to like build and like burn down and build the villages a couple times. Like he just went completely to the next level.
I mean, we've talked. I can't remember what movie it was that we talked about it, but I mean, even in things like talking about the way that they did practical effects on up to the early '90s, you know, it's like you get it in camera, or you don't get it.
Yep.
Like full stop. And like the idea that what we're getting in this shot is like human emotion, and we're accomplishing it through a shallow depth of field. So you're focusing on this guy's face. You're not looking at the fire in the background. Your eye knows where to look because of the focus plane that I'm creating with this shot. It's I don't know. It's just, it baffles me. It's records.
Yeah, it's so important to get that right too, because it is like, I feel like it is the biggest moment for Kichiro in that whole, like it's his most honest and vulnerable moment in the whole movie.
He's got an incredible arc in this movie.
Oh, incredible.
We can talk about Kikuchiyo's. Like I think there's a lot of guys in this movie that are who they are for the run of the movie. Like Kanbei, I think is an excellent, quiet, stoic leader. I don't think he changes. That's not a bad thing. I don't think he changes in the movie at all. He was the right guy for this job, and he continued to be that guy throughout the entire movie.
I agree, yeah.
Kikuchiyo, like he goes from can't stand up, drunk, mad at everybody, pretending to be a 13-year-old, by the way. He doesn't even remember his name.
That's the other thing about that scene we were talking about, like, 13, man.
He's got this family tree, and he's like, that's me right there. And it's like, it says you're 13, dude. Like, it's so funny. But they stick that name with him because he can't remember his real name. And so they're like, all right, fine, Kikuchiyo, that fits. That's great. And so he literally has nothing except for a memory of not having parents, basically. Like that's the only thing that defines him. And then he goes all the way, he makes this entire run at becoming a hero and saving this village. And he's great with kids. Like
dude, that scene is so funny.
His character in this movie, like it's a movie called, theoretically, there ought to be at least 7 main characters in this movie, and he's certainly one of them. But he's the highlight of this film. Everything else is used in exactly the right way, and you get the right impact out of characters like Kanbei and out of Kiyoso, and those guys are all doing their job admirably and great. And you get little tweaks of them changing. I would argue you don't see them change. You get to see more of them. Like as you go, because there's that moment where after Kiyoso runs out into the night and comes back saying like, I killed 3 of them, and then he just sits down and goes to sleep. And then what's his name? The guy that looks up to all of them. Katsushiro comes over and he's like, you're "You're so good."
He cracks me up.
Like he's just this quivering little fanboy about the samurai. And then after Katsushiro walks away, you see Kyoso kind of grin to himself a little bit before he goes back. So you get little peeks behind other people's curtains, but Kikuchiyo like drastically changes. Like he has a proper journey in this movie, and it's great. It's great to see.
I think the only character that grows as much as he does is Katsushiro, because he kind of starts as this like sheltered rich boy, and then wants to be a samurai, kind of goes through it. And I think by the end of the movie, I don't know if he goes on to keep being a samurai because he's like kind of recognized.
Yeah, he kind of has the opposite problem, right? He has like a good to worse kind of journey, which is interesting to watch too. But because like he seems pretty wrecked by the end of this whole thing.
Well, like, and again, like to me, it all goes back to that barn scene where because he's like begging Kanbei to be one of the samurai, and Kanbei's like, man, you don't get it. Like, you're gonna like waste your life dreaming about all your heroics, and then your hair will be gray, and your parents will be dead, and you'll have nothing. And he doesn't fully understand it because young people don't understand that. Like, they haven't been through it. But by the end of the movie, as one of the last 3 samurai, he's like, oh, I see what you mean. Like, this sucks, kind of.
This is real bad. Yeah. I got everything I asked for. Oh.
And I hate it.
Exactly.
And, like, he doesn't even, like, I think even Shino kind of is, like, a little done with him after the movie. Like,
I don't see them getting together after this.
Yeah.
Like, that's a whole other thing from... That's in. I mean, there's a healthy dose of that in Rashomon too, like the female perspective, or I guess it would close Kurosawa's perspective on the female situation in Japan. Like that whole thing where, what is it that it's Manzo is her dad?
Manzo's the dad.
Manzo is like, I can't sit here and watch my daughter be turned into damaged goods, and everybody's like, well, yeah, that's a fair point. It's just like,
well, no, but that's one of my
But
favorite.
that's 1500 Civil War era Japan. Kind of.
Probably 50s Japan too.
Even 50s Japan. I mean, come on, like
even
I'm sure 2020s everywhere is still like that to a degree, but like it's that's the moment where you're like, woof.
Well, to be fair though, I mean, Rikichi, who I don't think we've talked about much, who I think is a really interesting, subtle character.
One of the villagers.
Yeah, and I think as much as this movie is about 7 samurai, it's also about 3 farmers. I think it's about Manzo, Rikichi, and Yohei to a point, even though Yohei's just like constantly scared. But in that scene, so one of my other favorite scenes in the movie is when they find Rikichi's wife, because it's just devastating and heartbreaking. And so in that scene where Manzo finds Shino after she and Katsushiro consummated, Rikichi comes up and he's like, what is wrong with you? Like, my wife ran into a fire and you're mad about 2 people in love? And it's like so humbling for Manzo.
Yeah.
It's like, so it is like, there is that sensibility where like no one's shocked that he's like, basically disowning his daughter for, sleeping with a samurai. But at the same time, there is that moment of humanity where this man who just lost, I think he really loved his wife. The love of his life is like, oh my God, like, what is wrong with you? Yeah. So it's like weirdly also kind of modern in a way.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that we end up with both perspectives in one really quick scene. And it's another scene where everybody's just shouting at each other.
Yeah.
Like, which also, like, I wonder how much of this was production audio and how much was dubbed. They dubbed a ton back in those days.
Yeah.
They didn't have lavs back then.
No. So I imagine most of it was a lot of people in booths screaming to match their lips on the day. But are there any other specific moments we want to talk about?
I do want to talk about the scene that I just alluded to when they find Rikichi's wife, because I find it so stunningly shot, but also so stunning from a character standpoint. So it's when they're coming up on this bandit village and they're attacking it. And also it's an interesting character moment for Kikichiro because he has this bright idea of setting the buildings on fire, and then they can kill them as they're running out, which like isn't the most honorable thing in the world, but it is smart.
They are bandits.
Yeah,
they're trying to rob them.
They're bandits, and then meanwhile, like our heroes, like they're Ronin. Like, they're not. I mean, they're samurai, yes, but samurai. I mean, that is the other point that Kikuchiyo brings up is like farmers have done some gnarly stuff too, but in response to the way they've been treated by samurai. Yeah. So like that was another great scene that we can get to in more detail after this. But in terms of a question of honor in sort of how they're going after these bandits, like it's a very the goalposts move constantly in this movie. It's hard to pin down, like, is there a line that they're willing to cross? And with where in terms of killing bandits, no. The answer's no.
Yeah.
Like, they're fine with it.
Yeah, no, they're totally fine with it. They have that plan, again, really smart. And they see Rikichi's wife, and we don't know that's Rikichi's wife yet. Like
we know there's some baggage there about Rikichi and his wife. We don't know what it is yet.
Yeah, and it's been so like subtly kind of building to it. And the thing about Seven Samurai too that strikes me is like there's very few. The women don't get a lot of screen time, but I do feel like the time that they get is very impactful. So like with the old woman in another scene in the movie, and you get a look at Rikichi's wife, and she's just out of it. Like she's dazed, she's zoned out, and then the fire starts, and there's like a moment of startlement, but then just like almost like mania. Like she's like, oh my God, like I willed this, it's over. And the whole,
that's interesting.
Yeah, that's what I got from it, because like
you feel like that somehow she feels like I did it. I started this fire.
I think so. Okay, here's why I think that, because first of all, the music in that scene, there's this very high pitched flute that's ethereal in a way, but also like kind of unsettling. And the way that she's framed and kind of like these sheets, it's almost a little witch-like. Like they're almost framing her like a witch.
Well, there's that gauzy fabric that even the witch, the medium in Rashomon, is covered in that same sort of fabric. So
So like to me, she's looking around like, oh, I've been waiting for this. Like I'm like
just hoping to die.
Yeah, because like and I was doing the math in my head. They've probably been there for at least close to a year, because in the beginning of the movie they say like they already got their crops and everything, and then everyone's running out and they're killing everyone, and then Rikichi runs to her and she runs back into the fire. Like, oh, it is so. And then Hichachi dies, like. And that's like our first samurai death. It's such an important, devastating scene, and there's so much comic relief leading up to that, but I feel like that's really the moment where you're like, oh crap, like we're fully at war now.
It's the just got real moment.
It fully is. It's our first samurai death. And by the way, one thing I find interesting about this movie is all of the samurai that die by gunshot. So like villagers will die by the sword. But, like I think like he's probably saying something, Kurosawa, about how samurai can only die by their future or whatever. But
they're like the modern world is what's killing the samurai. And not,
because like everyone, I mean, Hichachi, Kyozo.
Kyozo and Kikuchiyo die kind of back to back there towards the end by the same guy, right?
I mean, I also think they're just a little more disciplined than the bandits.
Yeah, like
yeah, definitely.
Like, and there's a way to read it. Like this is another way that the bandits are cheating.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But no, that's.
But yeah, that's the, and that comes after the intermission too.
It does.
And that's the other thing we can talk about is the intermission, and we can get into Killers of the Flower Moon too if you want to. But leading immediately up to the intermission is the first time that Kanbei yells. It's an argument about protecting the houses that are the outer houses, right? And,
or not protecting.
Or not protecting. Yeah, and Kanbei just yells and like pulls a sword on people and get back in line, and then wind kicks up and there's dust and it's this big, like, that's another thing. And and next time I watch it, I want to put my finger on exactly how he's using wind kicking up and blowing dirt everywhere, because that's punctuation for Kurosawa in this movie. Like there are moments where wind kicks up and dust blows, and it happens when Kikuchiyo is after the first funeral, and he goes up and he puts the banner on top of that house, which is another incredible shot. A long lens looking past the samurai on the gravesite at Kikuchiyo in the distance with the banner. But we were talking about the intermission, so that's the first time that Kanbei yells, and everybody gets in line, and then we take a break.
Well, and I think
it's such a great little spot to I mean, it's kind of exactly the halfway point, but also like, by design.
The second half feels so different than the first half. Like, first half, not that there aren't moments of comic relief in the second, because there are, especially like with the horses and Kikichiro. But like, it really, like, Act 1 to me is like, this is what we're fighting for. And then Act 2 is like, oh, this is the fighting.
Is the fight.
Yeah. this is why it's not glamorous to be. And and again, it goes back to that whole deconstruction of the samurai myth, and it's not glamorizing it. It's really brutal. But I do love that moment with Kanbei. It's one of my favorite moments with him. And to your point about he doesn't really change much, but we see more of him. We really see a lot of layers to him as a leader.
Which I think he knows. He's going into this thing eyes wide open. He's the only guy that knows the score here. He knows what this is. He knows the risks. He knows what it's about. And so there's not, just looking at it from that perspective, there's not room for him to grow. He gets it from the start.
Yeah.
So. I think he's done, to your point, I think he's done all the growing before, and then it's just kind of just showing snippets of those life lessons through the action of the film.
Mm-hmm. But he still learns from, I think he learns a lot from Kikichiro, because Kikichiro is the kind of link between the farmers and the samurai, if we want to talk about community. Because you have this moment where the samurai first go into the village and nobody wants to talk to them, and Kikichiro is the only person who gets it.
Yeah, well, he's the one that gets them all to come around, right? Because he rings the alarm
exactly.
as it were, and everybody's freaking out. And he even points it. He's like, "Oh, we show up and you guys are jerks, but now the bandits are coming. Oh, please, sir, help!" He gets it too. There's wisdom to Kikuchiyo of a very different kind than Kanbei's, but it's there.
Yeah, and Kanbei, I think, is humble enough to kind of, at a certain point, realize that and be like, oh,
well, he learned his lessons as a samurai, where Kikuchiyo learned his lessons as a street rat, as he was Aladdin, or he was. I mean, he was an orphan just finding his own way. So.
Yeah, I could talk about these characters forever, and this is why I feel like Seven Samurai is really my, not to jump ahead too much, but it's really my favorite Kurosawa, because it's just such a human movie, and all of the characters, and there's so many characters, and they're all so well fleshed out. If they don't change, we see so much of them.
And I will say one more thing about the potential of Kanbei actually changing as a character. It is right at the very end, and he's talking about how we lost this. Turns out we lost this one too.
Yeah.
He's like, this victory was not ours, it was the villagers. And realizing that seemed to be a new experience for him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So realizing that my life as a samurai hasn't been about me, it's been about.
Maybe that's a change.
Maybe that's a change,
right?
I feel like
understanding the community of it all.
At minimum, that's the lesson he's going to take to his next experience.
Yep.
Yeah. I hope he retires though, because he looks real.
He's right. He's
ready.
It.
Yeah.
I need a vacation.
But he does kind of start that way in a little bit, because again, one of the reasons I love the top bun cutting scene is that he's so unconcerned with status and preface.
Well, yeah, it's the job.
Yeah.
He does the job. Yeah. Whatever. The idea that I'm going to pretend to be a monk and offer this guy rice before I kill him.
Yeah.
I mean, where's the honor in that? That's
he is
just
a Ronin.
He is a Ronin, exactly. So it's one of these. He's just a good dude that gets the job done.
And it
seems like.
And it blows Kikichiro's mind when in that first scene that I keep going back to at the top, I look at Mifune in that scene, and it looks like he's almost short circuiting. He can't comprehend the idea of a good noble samurai.
And I love that he and he knows something crazy is about to happen too.
Yeah.
He wanders up, kicks over the bucket, sits down. I gotta see this.
Yeah.
What is this dude doing?
And he's
and then when it works,
him,
he's laughing his ass off about it. Yeah.
It's such a unique Mifune performance too, because I think that I don't know, a lot of his other ones are a little more understated, but he has so much life in this one. If there's one thing that Kurosawa doesn't do to his actors, it's typecast, because he'll let Mifune do all kinds of things.
I will say this could have been, he could have been the guy from Rashomon. Kikuchiyo, he could have been that guy.
Oh, absolutely.
This was he went away from that trial, and then he turned into he went and got in this adventure with 6 other samurai. That feels possible.
That's a
if
fun.
You,
that's a
really,
fun storyline.
If you really want to make the Kurosawa verse, maybe that
I hate that
happened,
I like that, but that's fun.
We've been talking a lot about how all these characters have all of these arcs and moments, and they're so well fleshed out, and that's probably one of the more rewarding parts of this movie. Do you think that this movie needed to be 3.5 hours in order to make sure all of these characters feel so well developed, or that these characters are so well developed that you need to have 3.5 hours to do it? And I ask this because I guess what I'm trying to say is
because you hate 3-hour movies.
I do hate 3-hour movies. I'm going to just say that right now, and I want to have the conversation.
Let's have the rest of this conversation through the lens of you hate 3-hour movies.
hate is a strong word
It is
that
Kyle.
I will stand behind.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm proud of it, Dan.
Yeah, it's like
I hate 3-hour movies. Now, having said that, there is a very prominent 3-hour movie in the news right now named Killers of the Flower Moon that I am a huge fan of. So while I disdain what in films that aren't Seven Samurai and Killers of the Flower Moon, I think a 3-hour movie is like the most what's the word I'm looking for here? Egregious, self-aggrandizing thing.
a little arrogant to make a 3-hour
it's
movie.
extremely arrogant. It's extremely arrogant to think that like I need 3 hours of your time. It's like adding a fourth line to a haiku. You know?
Sure. I think runtime is like anything else, right? Like I think runtime is if it's, if you earn it.
Well, that's
Like,
what
great.
that's kind of
That's
where
great.
that's kind of what I
So-
want to talk about is how do you earn 3 hours?
You look at a film like Killers of the Flower Moon, that's a true story.
Yeah.
And like a lot of very terrible things happen in this true story. And like, how do you decide as a artist making a rendering of this moment in time? How do you decide what's important enough to make a cut to get it down to 2 hours? Like you don't do that. It's like if it's a true story and there are important things and these are real people that you're talking about, make it as long as you need to, right? Seven Samurai doesn't have that issue. I would say that to your initial question about like, are these characters so well fleshed out that we needed 3 hours for them? I think it's more that these characters are so well fleshed out. I didn't mind spending 3 hours with them.
So
You know?
I think you managed to better hit the nail on the head, which is how do you earn 3 hours? It's something that if you're gonna break that 3-hour seal, it's something that needs to be earned.
Right.
And
to break it down to its most simple, too, you need to be entertaining. Like, you need to not get bored while you're watching it. Like, this movie is so tight. In theory, I 100% agree with you that I think, like, a lot of 3-hour plus, even 2.5-hour plus movies, there is an arrogance there. But, like, this one just moves along so fast.
I think I have an answer to my own question, which is why I asked it in
Okay.
more of a rhetorical thing.
None of us have gotten there yet.
Yeah.
But,
So I do actually think it is about characters, right? And having a large amount of fascinating characters. This movie doesn't feel long or you don't mind the time because you spend time with all of these different people and you feel like you know them you know them at a depth that can only come with time. It's like that Malcolm Gladwell kind of like, in order to master something, you need to spend like 10,000 hours doing it, right? You need to spend the time in order to understand these characters at the depth at which they are presented, which makes that time feel shorter because you have this robust understanding. The same thing works in Killers of the Flower Moon, which is, if you see that, like all of the rogues and the scumbags that are in this are genuinely fascinating people. Yeah. And it's so interesting to watch. And it blows my mind because, again, I will sit here and I will talk to you how much I do not like 3-hour movies, and like I'm immediately docking off points of a movie if it has a runtime.
before you even walk in.
Before I even walk in, right?
It's like it's starting in a hole.
It's starting in a hole. Like we're already off on the wrong foot. I'm not giving you the benefit of the doubt. You mean to tell me that in these 3 hours there was not 5 minutes to?
You're
get
already
up there?
Tom Hanks at the end of Saving Private Ryan going,
and
earn this.
Here's where I find it interesting, right? So I think Killers of the Flower Moon is successful on its runtime, just like this is, because it has such a large cast of characters that are colorfully portrayed. I feel like John Wick 4 feels like a longer movie than Killers of the Flower Moon because it doesn't have the cast of characters to support its runtime. There's a specific moment in John Wick, which is when he gets to the top of the stairs and then he falls back down.
No, but I love that moment.
I hate that moment.
I love it.
I sat in the theater.
I yelled, not the stairs.
Not the
I
stairs.
sat in that theater and I'm like, Jesus Christ. Are you kidding me? I have to watch him fight back up these damn stairs. Like, when is this thing going to end?
Yeah.
And you never feel that in this movie. You don't feel it in Killers because you are so emotionally invested in the breadth of characters, not like John Wick and that is how I feel that, like, you earn a 3-hour watch time.
I feel like we've talked about this with a handful of the movies, way back in season 1.
Way back.
Yeah, but the idea of shorthand in movies, like at this stage of our movie industry and of us as consumers of it, like there are certain things that we just get. Right? There's a fluency with movies that I understand that this is the bad guy, and I understand that there's a goal this person needs to get to or whatever. And so I think I give filmmakers a lot of credit when they effectively use that shorthand to kind of cut some corners and not linger into a 3-hour runtime, right? Whereas there are other moments where, to your point about all of the characters that are interesting people, it's as soon as you start tugging on a thread a little bit, you gotta tug the whole thing, right? So, with characters like all of the Seven Samurai and all the villagers and I didn't even, you mentioned I also think this is about 3 villagers. Mm-hmm. I was oh yeah, you're right. Yeah. Because everybody gets, we're not just scratching the surface with anybody. Everybody gets a full portrait, and that takes time, And there are movies where the 2-hour cut of this movie, I think you have to pull. One is probably not as good, and 2, you have to pull out several of the characters. Yeah. That's a movie that is not about the villagers, right? Mm. That's a movie that's just about the four of the Seven Samurai. The guy that dies first, I think, dies sooner and becomes a symbol more than he does an actual character. You lose that conversation about how, he'll be entertaining in hard times.
A treasure
in hard times. Yeah, you lose that conversation because then he's gonna die soon, and we're gonna raise these stakes earlier in the movie by showing that these 7 samurai are fallible and they might actually lose.
He's a plot point, not a character.
He's cannon fodder. Yeah, he's a cannon fodder plot point more than he is an actual character. And that's the 2-hour cut of this movie, which I'm not as into.
No.
I want to talk to you about shorthand too.
Yeah.
You brought that up. To your point, I don't know how much cinematic shorthand existed at this point. So it has to go out of its way to set things up, and you can look at the final battle as Act 3 as its own movie that is set up. And the way that Kurosawa goes far out of his way, and not in a negative way, to have the map. Here is where all of the battles are going to happen. Here's how we are going to defend them. And this is it's you're going to be here, you're going to be here, you're going to be here, and you see the points on the map, then you see the layout, right? You see it in the set, in the world, so you know where everything is happening, so you're spatially aware as when the bandits are attacking different points simultaneously, and you're not lost in the back.
You know what that means to them as in their defensive strategy.
Not only that, then we know that there are 50 bandits, and they literally have that scroll of all the circles, so they're literally keeping score of how many are left and who's left to vanquish, and it just makes that flow so much better, and you just are totally invested, to your point. Whereas maybe if John Wick had a little scroll of there's only a couple of circles left, I could sit through this.
That's the thing, and that's where this conversation kind of comes full circle before we move on to movie lists and stuff. The legacy of this movie being so impactful and so influential in every other movie, and then the fact that shorthand for filmmaking didn't exist in the 50s yet. It sure as hell does now, and that's why Soderbergh is doing the same thing that Kurosawa did for Ocean's 11, but he's doing it in split screen and montage with VO, and we understand what's happening because we've all seen, if we haven't seen Seven Samurai, we've seen 30 other movies that were copying Seven Samurai, and at this point it's a thing that we visually get immediately. We're fluent in that language, and we don't have to have it explained to us.
To which I said earlier, and started out, this is a foundational text on action cinema. And watching this movie again this time made me realize how little has been innovated, and
how disappointing these last 75 years were.
There's our new Seven Samurai.
How little has been innovated in the last 70 years?
Ish. Let's move on to movies.
On that depressing note.
Yeah.
So,
not to say all these new movies are bad. It's just that this really carries a lot of weight.
It's a testament to Kurosawa.
So this movie, I frankly stopped looking after I found enough movie lists
I was
that this has
gonna say
been
how
on.
hard
This
it
is
was.
a
Yeah.
top 10 character arcs of all time. For Kikuchiyo made that list, which we talked a lot about his character arc and all of that. Happy to see that made it. Top 10 leaders of all time. Kanbei was on that list. And, you know, I mean, we talked a lot about like just the quiet,
I mean, it's a joke.
confident nature that he went about pulling off this job.
I mean, he's a leader that like anyone, like a manager that anyone would be lucky to have. Like he's like
A
the
manager.
best manager.
Honestly, he's
Best
an
manager.
incredible manager.
I feel like every manager should watch Seven Samurai.
Yeah. And then also read Kurosawa's autobiography, where he talks a lot about the same thing. Top 10 character introductions of all time. We had another one. Kanbei made that list as well, which I think the whole sequence with how we meet him is shaving off his samurai's top knot.
I thought you were gonna say Kurozu because the duel is such a interesting.
It was super cool. Yeah. I mean, there's a handful. I mean, a movie, again, one of the tropes, the assembling the team trope that we are all hyper aware of at this point. You know, everybody gets
Wait,
cool
how do you
intro.
assemble a team?
We'll watch Seven Samurai again. I'll explain it.
Oh, okay.
We have time.
All right.
Then, what else did we get? Top 10 action movies. It got our action adventure pick.
Foundational
Yep.
text.
Another one I found was top 10 props for
Who's-
Kikuchiyo's sword.
Okay, can we talk about this?
Yes,
Is this-
let's
is-
do it.
So, like, the Buster Sword, is this the invention of the Buster Sword? Because, like,
what do you mean by that? Is that a thing that I'm?
like,
is that
so do you know
cinema
what-
shorthand that I'm actually not fluent in?
like, you know, like Final Fantasy, that guy, like, the one
Oh.
character has the, like,
Yeah.
in all anime.
Isn't he around
Seven
here somewhere?
Samurai, that huge friggin' sword,
Yeah.
right? Like, his sword is so comically large
Yes.
in this. It draws the eye in every scene. The way he carries it,
Uh-huh.
he can't just put it on his belt and walk around. It needs to.
and he incorporates it into his strut.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's part of
It's a limb.
Yeah.
It's another limb. It's
Yeah.
another part of him.
Well, there's even a shot like early in the movie when they're when it's like with Kanbei on the road. There's like a shot where Kikichiro turns around and like it almost looks like an accident. Like the sword is in the camera. Like it's really calling your attention.
Yeah. Well, and it's so obviously bigger than everybody else's too, which like as a representation of the character, like here's a guy who's putting on a show and pretending to be something that he's not. And then so like just the brilliance of sitting there coming up with this character and being like, oh, you know what he needs? He needs a sword that's way too
Giant ass,
He needs a
way too big
huge
sword.
goddamn sword. And it's so perfectly. I mean, and this is another thing too. Like maybe movie shorthand didn't exist, but this sort of qualifies as that. We're like, what visually can we do with this character that will like key us into who he is immediately?
I mean, you know what? That's just like good animation, right? Like they
Right.
always talk about that in animation is like, how do you make the silhouette stand out? So all you have to do is see like if you see the silhouette of Bugs Bunny or Homer Simpson, you know exactly who that is. And if you see the silhouette of him with the with his sword, just like, oh yeah.
Yeah. But after the props, that's where I stopped looking because I figured that's 5 right there just immediately that I found in like 30 seconds. I'm sure there are more.
So
and at minimum, I'm sure it gets an honorable mention in just about every episode we do. So
Have we done a top 10 of overzealous 3-hour movies?
top 10 3-hour movies that deserve it.
Top
that
10,
earned it.
Yeah, top 10 3. That's a great.
That would
list.
be
That's actually pretty fun.
Top 10 3-hour.
movie.
I'm going to give that one to you.
Great. I'll take care of that.
Yeah, that's your homework. Top 10 3-hour movies that actually deserve it, actually earned it,
3-hour movies that earn their runtime.
not including director's cuts.
No. Theatrical cuts.
Theatrical cuts, 3-hour movies that deserve it. Who deserved that second VHS tape?
I always think of the double Titanic VHS
Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
parents' house. Like,
Dances with Wolves had one too.
Yeah,
I think. I'm almost certain that it got an honorable. I'd have to go back and watch the whole top 10 westerns that we did. I'm almost certain that it at least got an honorable mention in there. It wasn't one of the picks.
Well, it shouldn't be.
Yeah,
'cause,
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you picked one of the westerns that,
The Magnificent Seven was on there.
Yeah.
No, that one wasn't on there. But
Surprised we haven't really talked about the Magnificent Seven.
I mean, we talked a little bit about that, about how infinitely remakeable and it has proven to be over the years. Like, there are so many different versions of Seven Samurai.
Dirty Dozen.
I want to say, I'd have to double check this again, because I read this in passing somewhere, that I think the original American release of the Seven Samurai was actually called the Magnificent Seven in like
Was it really?
1956 or whenever it finally made its way over here. I could be wrong about that. So this might be a thing that we cut around later. But point is, the Magnificent Seven was just a start to finish remake of the movie, which probably used a lot of that shorthand and earned its 2-hour runtime.
Yeah. And I enjoy Magnificent Seven, but you can almost kind of, and I had watched Magnificent Seven before I ever came to Seven Samurai.
Right.
And it's like, you can just tell it's not the original. I don't know how to describe it, but you can tell that like it's not innovating in the way that Seven Samurai did. And I still really like Magnificent Seven. I think it's really fun. I think it's entertaining, but it's you can, even if you didn't know, I feel like you could tell it's not the OG.
Yeah. Any other movie lists we want to add?
I mean, like we've been saying, it's hard because like I feel like it should be on everyone.
Yeah.
I mean,
it
it's
was
a
'cause it was
long-running
also-
CineFix joke for years, right? Like Kurosawa.
Yeah, well, mostly it's about the mirror, Tarkovsky, but the Seven Samurai is a close second.
Yeah.
Where the westerns thing are concerned, because it was influenced by some of the John Ford westerns. Like Kurosawa was a big fan of those. So in terms of its place in like the idea of it being a western, like it was as influential as anything else. But anyway, I honestly like pick a movie list that we've done, and odds are.
Yeah.
I don't think it was on horror movies.
Well,
I didn't use it in narration because nobody narrates it recently. That's it. I don't know.
it's in like. I'm not saying it should be on a comedy list because it's not a comedy, but it is very funny at times.
I think we even used it in one of our Brilliant Moments episodes where it was camera movement.
Oh.
Because like, and this is one thing that we touched on briefly, but I kept thinking we'd work our way back to. But the way that the final action sequence is blocked when they start attacking in earnest, and it takes place over the course of 2 or 3 days. Like the way we talked a bit about like the chaos of the blocking and where everybody's running. This is another thing that is in his thoughts on filmmaking at the back of his autobiography. Is he talked about camera placement. He shot that multicam, which was not a thing that people did very often. But he diagrammed everything. Where he put one camera, he called it an orthodox position. Camera A was in the most traditional position that there was. Camera B was doing close-ups, and camera 3 was kind of a free agent, kind of guerrilla picking up whatever. And there's a few spots in the movie where you can pick that up, where within the same sequence there will be a shot that just looks way more handheld. And so like I think that was probably C camera, like a handheld shot of a horse running off by himself.
All the horse scenes feel a little more loose.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that was going on, but the way that he mentions in the autobiography too about like there are only a few DPs that he would trust to do it, and he even name checked a couple. He's like, here's a short list of people that can actually pull this off. And so he just didn't trust many camera ops to pull it off, and like the way that he diagrammed the scene, and also narratively the way that he set up the consequences of the action, and here's what's happening on the east and the west, and here's what's happening in the north, and this is where the action will take place, and just as chaotic as everything appears to be on screen, including people not being able to stay on their feet. It's muddy and it's slippery and they're falling over and they're chasing after each other. And I'm just like, those can't be real swords, right? Because you're like about to stab everybody, which is how it's chaos, but you can follow it. You follow it perfectly just because of the way that the cameras are moving and the way that it's all cut together. Because he just knew that it was going to be like that and that there's no way it would happen the same way twice. So he put 3 cameras on it.
It's one of those things that shouldn't work. Like it can only work.
Well, that's the only way to do it.
Right.
Like, and he did it. He knew it was going to happen, and he knew the solve for it, and he pulled it off. Even though it took like a whole year to shoot the thing.
It took way too long.
Yeah.
Well, that's the fun. And not to go off too much, not to dip into Torf too much, but like even that battle scene, like because it took so long to shoot the movie, it was winter by then. Yeah. Like that must have been miserable. Like I think I read somewhere that like Kurosawa lost toenails because it was so cold.
Jeez.
Like what?
I saw a quote from Mifune who said it's the coldest he's ever been.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which because they wound up shooting some of that stuff. All that muddy stuff was in like February.
It sounded
Insane.
terrible.
Yeah.
One of those things that filmmaking is not glamorous.
Okay, well let's jump into Torf.
Might as well. Good segue.
Here's some things you didn't know, some true or falses. This is a thing that hasn't.
I'm just going to agree with Clint because whatever Clint says is what I'm going to go with, considering he read the autobiography.
Yeah, but he stopped talking about his career after Rashomon. It's an autobiography. So.
Yeah, we're good. We're good. Well, before we jump into
Like I've always appreciated Kurosawa. I've never been like a devotee until I read that book. It's really good.
I'm gonna have to read it.
He's an interesting guy to hear talk about himself.
Yeah. And before we get
Very self-aware too. He's like, I feel weird doing this, but I'm gonna do it. But
well, even it doesn't surprise me that he doesn't talk about Seven Samurai in the book because there's not as much as you would think out there about the making of the movie. Like, yes, it was 1954, and they weren't doing making of featurettes at the time.
There
but
wasn't bonus features.
There wasn't bonus
bonus
features, but so let's hope Tayo found some good ones to stump you guys.
all right, what do we got?
All right, true or false? After filming the intense sequence where the samurai and villagers burned down the bandits' fortress in the film, Kurosawa was reportedly so overwhelmed by stress that he broke down into tears once filming concluded. True or false?
I'm gonna go true.
Yeah, I'm going to go true.
That feels like a thing that he would do.
Yeah, he's in touch with himself.
Or I'm gonna say false, and it was a different scene that had him break down in tears.
There's a different crew member who broke.
Yeah, exactly. There's one part of that that's false. No, true.
That's true. We're not. The production required a fire truck on standby, not surprising, but faced a delay as all the nearby trucks were occupied fighting real fires. While waiting, Kurosawa and crew applied gasoline around the fortress set. The ensuing fire during filming burned unexpectedly fast and hot, and during filming, the actor who plays Rikichi, his windpipes were severely burned. Overwhelmed, Kurosawa cried as firefighters doused the flames. And I actually heard Rikichi's voice actor, his voice was never the same because he basically had a big inhale and inhaled so much hot gasoline air. Yeah, and it straight up burned his windpipes.
Okay.
That's
well,
not a very fun fact, but it's
we got it right though, so I guess
Yeah.
that's a bonus.
Okay. True or false? Toshiro Mifune stated that Kurosawa's film was initially intended to be titled The Last Samurai, focusing on a day in the life of a samurai culminating in the protagonist's suicide. This title was later adopted for the 2003 film bearing the same name.
That is true.
Yeah, that part of it is true. I mean, in that Tom Cruise was in The Last Samurai.
What?
That's true.
I'm going to say the whole.
We do know that movie existed.
I'm going to say the whole thing is true.
Tom
Cruise was The Last Samurai.
I'm gonna go false. I don't think this was ever considered. I don't think he was ever going to call this movie The Last Samurai.
Okay, that's what we'll focus on. Forget the Tom Cruise.
That's the false part.
Okay. It's false. Yeah, there you go.
This is what I said. This is why
This is what you get for not. You were gonna agree with me.
I forgot.
What you get for answering first.
I forgot my own strategy here.
No, it was originally titled Six Samurai. Not nearly as catchy, by the way. But on reflection, they found that having six responsible, sober samurai heroes was a little dry. As a result, they created the pretender samurai Kikichiro, who's more empathetic and emotional, and cast Mifune. Can you imagine this movie without Kikichiro?
No, but that's incredible though, because thinking of him as the solve for this movie is wonderful.
And he's so necessary.
Yeah.
He needs. I mean, we were saying, if you had, I don't think you should necessarily pick a main character, but if you had to, it's Kikichiro.
Yeah. He's the heart of it.
Yeah.
So let's think of it this way: 7 samurai, great. 6 samurai, not as interesting. 5 samurai.
There's no alliteration there. We can't do it.
No alliteration.
Yeah.
4 samurai.
No, I might be thinking you're talking about a movie that is made for samurai.
4 samurai.
Yeah.
3
on behalf of samurai.
3 samurai. That's nothing.
No.
2 samurai. That's a duel.
That's a duel.
Right.
Now we're back to The Last Samurai.
No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And if it's just one samurai,
One is the
then-
loneliest.
We can do that one, but with Tom
One
Cruise.
is the loneliest samurai.
All right. True or false? The lighting techniques employed by Kurosawa during filming resulted in an eye injury for one of the cast members.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'll go true.
Yeah,
with
I
that.
feel
it
like-
has to be bright as fuck on that set.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with for one of the cast members.
Yes, cast members.
If you're gonna false me here because it was actually one of the crew members, I'm gonna be
It was
so
Kurosawa himself.
I read a whole thing about Rashomon and a shot that looked directly at the sun. So I'm dubious that you might be trying to trick me into that, but I'm gonna go true.
You're correct. It's true.
It's true.
For the love scenes between Shino and Kat Chichiro, Kurosawa wanted to achieve a glittering effect in Shino's eyes. To do this, he used angled mirrors on the ground to reflect light up to her face. Because of constant retakes, her eyes were ultimately injured by overexposure to glaring light.
Something about those old days.
Constant retakes.
You do it for the shot.
She singed her retina.
Yeah.
I could
Oh,
never
man.
see the same again.
So we got one guy that can't talk and and a lady that can't see.
Well, and like Kurosawa lost toes. Like, my God. Not toes, toenails.
Back when art meant something. I bet they never talked about going on strike.
All right, I believe that this is the last Torf. Okay, so high
Final.
pressure.
The Last Torf, much like The Last Samurai.
Exactly.
The Last Torf starring Tom
The,
Cruise.
yeah, the Tom Cruise of Torfs. True or false? Production was so stressful that Mifune and Kurosawa got into a fist fight on set.
True. I think so.
I'm gonna
I
go
mean,
false.
it's the coldest that he'd ever been.
Tensions were high.
Tensions were high. He was breaking down in tears after sequences. I think it's
False.
entirely possible.
I'm gonna go false.
Now that you've said that, I also want to go false, but I'm sticking with my guns. I'm going true.
Because he's the general here.
As the
He
one
can't
who
fight-
read the
he-
autobiography where he spoke about not doing shit like this,
He's the general. He can't fight his own
can't
troops.
fight his own troops. Yeah, but sometimes, just like Kanbei, right before the intermission, sometimes you gotta show some
Yeah.
tough love. So I'm sticking with true.
All right.
Should have gone false. Yeah. Painful.
Knew it in my gut.
No, but this is interesting. Mifune threatened Kurosawa with a gun on this.
Oh,
So it wasn't a fist fight. It was worse.
it was worse.
The reason is not publicly known, but in 1993, at the funeral of their friend Ashiro Honda, after making tenuous eye contact, they tearfully embraced one another, ending nearly 3 decades of mutual avoidance.
Oh, man.
They never collaborated again, but however, nor did they have a chance to restore their friendship fully. Kind of.
I hate to hear that.
I know.
That's no good.
But at
Well,
least
I mean,
they had a nice hug.
Clint, if I pulled a gun on you, would you talk to me tomorrow?
No,
Okay.
no.
It's a little it's a little intense.
Well, that's the part that I hate to see. Is
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just like, why would you do that?
yeah.
All it's going to result in this is you're not going to talk for 3 decades and you're going to cry about it at somebody else's funeral.
Yeah.
Hate to see it. All right.
That's Torf.
まだもんだどいつもこいつもかかしには持ってこいだだから相手はスズメはカラスじゃねえんだ
MVP of the film. I think this will be a quick segment here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Kurosawa.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, Mifune gives a hell of a performance. Shimura gives a hell of a performance, but it's Kurosawa.
It's Kurosawa. I mean, as the co-writer, director, and editor, like so much of the innovation that he pulled off was like just straight out of his brain and onto the screen. Like it's Kurosawa. But I am going to give him the MVP, the editor, Kurosawa.
Oh, you could
okay.
like pick which one you
I'm
want.
gonna I guess if it's that easy, maybe let's do that. I'm gonna give it to editor Akira Kurosawa.
I'm gonna give it to writer Kurosawa.
Because again, like we talked about earlier about keeping the crew engaged and how his approach to editing and showing the dailies as a sequence instead of as individual shots. And for a movie to run over budget and over schedule like this and through adverse circumstances, to keep everybody on board with the creative vision of it in that way, I think that's what did it.
That's why
So,
I would give
editor-
it to director Kurosawa, actually.
Okay.
Not to be contrarian,
No,
but
that's literally what we're doing this
yeah,
for.
yeah. Well, I mean, because we're not going to argue about it being Kurosawa.
Kurosawa. And I'm not going to get mad about you picking director from Kurosawa over editor. I mean, listen, I think you're dead wrong, but go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. No, I just like the way that he pulls everything together, and again, is the kambe of the production. And I just think that again, like going back to the performances, I think the performances that he gets out of people like Mifune and Shimura are just incredible.
Yeah.
I guess I'm split between writer Kurosawa and director Kurosawa because the thing that impresses me is, again, the story necessitated 3.5 hours. Unlike a certain revenge assassin that shall rename.
I don't think he's renaming or unnamed.
You're talking about John Wick.
I am.
Yeah.
You know,
No, that was not-
Stairmaster himself.
That was an exhausting 3 hours.
It was exhausting.
I enjoyed it.
I mean, if I revisit, if and when, because I'll go back to it at some point, I revisit John Wick 4, I'm just going to watch that overhead sequence and then call it a day. Like the part of the movie
Not the
where
Pratt fall down.
the
7
part of the
flights
movie
of
where it
stairs.
turns into the Warriors, like I'll watch that for a little bit, but
What about the 14 setups when he needs to kill 30 people with nunchucks? Like, they couldn't cut one of those out?
I'm good.
I would cut out one of those, but not any of the stairs. I want the stairs to be longer. I loved the stairs. I love John Wick's staircase.
I don't think that the stairs in and of it. I don't think the stairs. Let me just be clear here. In the Seven Samurai podcast,
Right. I was just going to say, I love that our Seven Samurai episode has turned into an indictment of John Wick 4.
Let me just be clear in our Seven Samurai podcast. I don't think it's the stairs in and of itself that were the problem. I think that it was just by the time he got to the stairs, I was just like, all right, I've seen enough. I just need him to get to the duel.
Yeah.
And then right when he gets to the top of the stairs and we know that the duel is next, he falls back down.
It felt like a you directly from the
That's why I like
filmmakers to us. And I was just like,
I was
you
like,
know
we
what?
deserve that.
If we were sitting here right now in 2.5 hours instead of 3.5, like maybe.
So why I'm saying I'm not sure if it's writer Kurosawa, director Kurosawa, maybe a combination of both Kurosawa, but the point is the man had a story that earned its 3.5 hours.
Cal, we got time for one more segment before we
Oh, yeah.
get to these envelopes.
So if Nicolas Cage was somehow alive in 1954,
It also wasn't white.
yeah, and also wasn't white,
Yeah,
who would he be? I think
I'll go first.
Yeah, I think there's just one answer here, but
Is there?
you
Yeah,
go
I
first.
think there's
Okay.
several.
All right.
I'm going to go with, I would like a young Nick Cage to play Katsushiro, the young samurai who's
Now, that's an interesting.
I think the rich kid who wants to play samurai and doesn't quite get it, a young Nick Cage would add like this layer of arrogance to that. I think that would be really interesting.
So you want Peggy Sue got married?
Peggy
Nicolas
Sue got
Cage.
married Nicolas Cage as Katsushiro.
You know, that's a more creative answer than me.
Great.
Yeah.
I win already.
Were you going to say Kakichiro?
Yeah,
Because I feel like that's the obvious
I
answer.
want,
Yeah.
but I want Mandy Nick
Sure.
Cage. To
I
do
mean, that's also, but here's the thing. That's also a correct answer.
Yes, it is. I mean, the beautiful part about this segment is there's no wrong.
There's no
answer.
wrong answers. Exactly.
There's also no right one.
The heart of every good podcast is not having any wrong answers.
I would say Kakichiro is the obvious answer. There's a lot of like bit players he could do. He could do like Yohei, just like cowering in the corner. But I like the idea of young Nick Cage as Katsushiro.
I do agree with you. The Peggy Sue Nick Cage is that's a move.
Yeah,
that's
that would
thinking
be
outs- that's
that would be
thinking
a
outside
fun
the box.
a fun bit where and particularly like everything that he goes through with falling for Shino, and then the way that relationship pans out and how terrible he feels about it and how like I don't know. I think Nick Cage could pull that off.
Do you think he needs the fake teeth?
The Peggy Sue fake teeth?
Yeah, the Peggy Sue fake.
I think we can skip that.
Oh no, I think we need it. Right? He's a rich.
I
kid.
don't know.
like if you're gonna
Oh,
commit,
you give him veneers?
yeah, like if you're gonna commit to the Peggy Sueification of that role, then
Yeah.
I think you got to go all in
Sure.
on that. He's
Yep.
just the obnoxious rich kid.
It's like he's an obnoxious rich kid who tried to be cool in every way that he could think of, and then he's like, I'm failing at all of this. Time to go be a samurai. Maybe that'll help.
Yeah.
And then he actually grows to learn what it means to be a samurai, and it's not what he expected. I'm into it.
Huh?
Yeah.
And then
And
then it ends with fast forwarding to present day where older Katsushiro is sitting there depressed.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm into it.
Yeah. the
Okay,
sequel.
good. Well, I'm happy I won that segment.
You did. I concede.
Okay.
Let me
great.
just fall down these stairs quick.
今度もまた負け戦だったな。いや、勝ったのはあの百姓たちだ。わしたちではない。
Well, let's get to these envelopes then, shall we? I'm sure it was high on your list. The way that you've talked about it, I feel like it was high. Where was it on your list?
I wish I had put it at 7. I don't know why I didn't think to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been real cute. It's not far though. It's not my number 10.
Oh, yeah.
Just
Okay.
barely in the top 10.
Hey, all right.
I wonder, like, I'm curious to find out now what's 7, 8, and 9.
I know, now- 'cause
why
I
you
don't-
didn't.
I-
Were what you have at 7, 8, and 9?
budge on them, yeah.
Is it really not worth the joke of having
Right.
7 Samurai at number 7?
That's what I'm saying. Like, what beat it to not? Yeah, yeah.
I can't imagine that it actually was worth it. Cal, do you have it on your list?
There is a movie that has samurai in the title on my list, but unfortunately, it is not this one.
Tom Cruise is the last samurai.
It is the last samurai. No, it is not.
Big Edward Zwick stand.
This is not on my list. I elected for Rashomon, but I will say that.
Oh, right, because you have your one filmmaker rule.
Yeah, well, I broke my own rule, but for most filmmakers, they only get one.
Right.
And Kurosawa, at that moment in time, was a one-movie filmmaker. And this is the first episode where I regret my decision.
Oh, okay.
This one should make Seven Samurai should be on my list somewhere.
Because you got me with Sunset Boulevard. I'm glad I got you with one.
Yeah.
I also did not have it on my list.
After all this.
I also have Rashomon. I mean, this is the fascinating thing about doing this show is like I didn't rewatch every movie I've ever seen before I made my top 100. Like there's a lot of shooting from the hip and a lot of gut work that went into it. I don't know that I would. I mean, listen, it deserves a place on any top 100.
Do you have a Kurosawa on your list?
I do have Rashomon on my list.
Yeah.
I'm a big Throne of Blood guy. I love that movie.
Hey,
I love High and Low.
Birth of the Squib.
Yeah. So like I think there are more talking about how influential this movie has been and how familiar it feels revisiting it. Like that's a certain type of credit that the movie deserves because it has been so easily imitated, right? And so easily recognizable as like, oh, well, this is Seven Samurai, but in space, or but a comedy, or but whatever. I think movies like Rashomon and High and Low and movies like that, and Throne of Blood, which itself is it's Shakespeare, but the idea that those movies haven't been revisited as well as Seven Samurai is, like I don't know, I give it bonus points for the fact that you can't imitate Rashomon the way that you can imitate Seven Samurai, I guess. Which doesn't make any sense because I've given credit to movies
Last Duel kind of does a good job.
It does. It does a very good job. Way fewer than Seven Samurai. But I have given credit. This is why my list doesn't make any sense because I've also given credit to movies, I think over credited movies for doing something first. Rather than better, so like I don't know. It who knows?
And I don't
Point is, it's not on my list.
Yeah.
I'm told.
Oh yeah, Dan.
Dan has it at number 29.
Okay. Oh, so I'm thinking it's top 50 if it's in two of our top 50.
This is going to be big.
Yeah.
A well-sealed envelope.
But I will say I was wrong. This deserves to be on my list, and I am going to actively look for a place for it.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert for our next envelope.
Yeah.
I
Can't imagine we're all going to agree to give this the boot, but
Wow.
28.
That's pretty good.
Alright.
Number 28.
Okay.
Where is
So-
that on the list of like the episodes we've done so far?
I feel like a lot of ours.
I'm gonna look it up right now. Hold on.
I feel like a lot of ours have been in the 50s and 60s.
I think
I feel like
so.
we've done a lot of. And we had the one top 10. Remember,
Yeah.
Terminator 2 was a top 10, and we don't know where that was.
I think this
But
is
we
one of
haven't
our
done.
higher entries.
Yeah, we haven't done many quite so high as 28.
See it.
So I feel like safely I can assume we're not going to open this envelope.
I can say that's safe.
Because while it's not on my list, and while Cal thinks it deserves to be on his list for sure, I'm not going to vote that we give this movie the boot.
Does
It deserves
Dan
to be
get
on the
to
top.
jump in?
No, is he here right now?
I guess
He's not.
I guess what I'm trying to say
Dan's
is
probably on vacation again.
theoretically this movie, according to our list, is only slightly less important than RoboCop.
According
Is
to the
RoboCop
episodes that we've
above
done.
Yeah, RoboCop's above it. RoboCop's 22. Which, you know what?
I love that there's RoboCop.
and
There's
there's
5 other movies.
and
then,
then
there's Seven Samurai.
Five movies.
I can't wait to find out.
know.
Like I just wanted to get it in the ballpark of one of ours. And you know what? RoboCop is good company.
RoboCop. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I would like to think
Robo
that
needs
Kurosawa would appreciate being this close to
I
RoboCop.
think he would, actually.
Yeah, you gonna put Seven Samurai in the same sentence as RoboCop? Thanks,
Fair
guys.
enough. I'll take it.
All right. Well, that is gonna do it for us. Welcome back to season 2, the community season, the 6 seasons in a movie season of the top 100. But that's going to do it for us and our Seven Samurai business. So thanks so much for watching. Thanks for talking about Kurosawa with me, guys. And once again, thank you to producer Tayo Oyekan, our DP Jamie Parslow, who is very casually sitting over there. He just gave me the, yeah, it's fine. You gave me the wave. It's fine. Technical producer Marhyan Franzen is in a different room somewhere, but she's equally responsible for all of this working. And I don't think that Dan is going to be thanked. Do you guys feel like thanking Dan for anything?
Nah, f*** 'em.
No, I think
No.
some things don't change in season 2.
Yeah, no, season 2.
Yeah.
That's the going to be the consistency.
Constant, yeah.
We're going to change by the time we're done with this, we're going to change literally everything about it. We will still not be thanking Dan. But next week, next week we're going to be watching a remake of Seven Samurai, The Three Amigos.
How fitting.
The Three Amigos.
So 3 samurai.
Three
I guess
samurai.
that ended up working for
Exactly.
somebody.
It's kind of 3 Kikuchiyos.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, listen, the good news is we'll get to talk about Seven Samurai again next week. So, but that'll do it. So thanks again for watching. Stay safe, be good. We'll see you next time.